Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you've ever thought about different ways to hunt or maybe manage pests, you've probably seen air gun hunting mentioned, maybe even kind of dismissed it, right? Well, today we're here to challenge that a little. We're doing a deep dive into the modern air rifle. We want to look at how this thing, which, you might associate with plinking in the backyard, has actually become a legitimate tool for taking game.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial distinction we need to make right off the bat. Because when you hear air gun, you likely picture, well, maybe a classic spring piston rifle or a simple CO2 gun.
Exactly. Like the one I had as a kid.
Right. But the sources we looked at, they're focused squarely on the modern high-power platforms, specifically PCP rifles. That stands for pre-charged pneumatic.
Okay, PCP. Let's unpack that a bit. So the mission for you, listening in, is pretty straightforward. By the end of this chat, you should get the real difference between like a toy and a proper tool. What you can actually hunt with this newer tech and, what are the practical differences compared to using, say, a standard rimfire rifle or even a bow.
And that PCP technology, that's really the heart of its legitimacy now. It uses highly compressed air stored in a reservoir on the gun.
Okay.
And that delivers really consistent high-power shots. The energy output, it's often comparable to something like a .22 short rimfire round. It's serious gear.
Wow, okay.
Which naturally brings us to that first big question. What can you actually hunt with one of these?
Yeah, that's the real test, isn't it? Because like I said, people think small stuff, maybe squirrels, maybe a rabbit if you're lucky. But the sources we reviewed suggest the scope might be, well, a bit broader than that.
That's right. I mean, yes, squirrels and rabbits are absolutely the bread and butter of airgun hunting, no question. But the list is surprisingly comprehensive. It really shows how versatile these rifles can be.
Such as?
We're talking things like woodchucks, raccoons, opossums.
Really? Raccoons?
And depending on where you live, say, down south in warmer climates, air rifles are actually uniquely suited for dealing with specific pest issues, like invasive iguanas, for example.
Iguanas, okay, that's specific.
It is. But generally, anything in that smaller size class is potentially fair game, provided you're using the appropriate caliber and power level for it.
That iguana point is fascinating, though. It kind of highlights how these rifles can be solutions for, like, really local specific pest problems where maybe a traditional firearm is just too much or too loud.
Exactly.
But speaking of pests, you mentioned that pest control is sort of a separate conversation from small game hunting, often because of the legal side.
Precisely, yeah. Small game hunting usually has, defined seasons, bag limits, pretty clear rules. Pest control, though, that can get murky. Because the definition of what constitutes a pest depends entirely on the jurisdiction. Your state, your county, sometimes even your city.
Okay.
So while rats are, pretty much universally accepted as pests you can control, that annoying crow that keeps raiding your tomato plants, it might actually be classified as a protected migratory bird where you live, even if it feels like a pest to you.
Right. So looking back at the source material, the key takeaway here seems to be the air rifle might be perfectly effective for the job.
Definitely effective.
But that effectiveness means nothing if it's not legal. You're completely bound by the specific laws of your state or locality. Effectiveness doesn't override legality.
Absolutely. You absolutely must check your local regulations, even for animals that seem like obvious pests. Because, using a high-power air rifle, especially anywhere near residential areas, it comes with intense scrutiny. Legally and, frankly, ethically, too.
That ethical point is key. It leads us straight into the next big area. Power, caliber, and, well, humane kills. For someone used to hunting with, say, a centerfire rifle, or even a good .22 rimfire, giving up that known power and range for air, it might seem like a big trade-off. How does a pellet actually stack up against a bullet? How much power do you need to ensure an ethical, quick kill?
Right. And that really gets to the core of the legitimacy argument. To judge the power properly, we can't just talk about velocity, like feet per second. We really need to talk about FPE, that's foot-pounds of energy.
FPE. Baby.
FPE is the technical metric. It tells you about the pellet's ability to penetrate effectively and achieve a humane kill. It combines the pellet's weight and its speed.
Gotcha. And what sort of FPE numbers are we looking at as minimums for those animals you listed earlier? Squirrels, raccoons?
So for ethical hunting, the sources generally suggest some minimum thresholds. You typically want at least, say, 10 to 12 FPE delivered at the target for something like a squirrel or a rabbit.
Okay, 10 to 12.
But you're going to need substantially more, perhaps closer to 30, maybe even 50 FPE, if you're looking at large or small game like those woodchucks or raccoons.
Right, quite a jump.
Yeah, and that's precisely why the caliber matters so much.
We mentioned the common calibers earlier. .177, .20, .22, and .25.
Right.
How do those scale up in terms of FPE potential?
Well, the jump in caliber dramatically increases the potential FTE. A .177 pellet is light. It's fast, sure, but it might only be adequate for, say, small bird pests or maybe very close-range squirrels. To reliably meet those higher FPE targets needed for larger animals like raccoons, you really need to step up to the .22, and especially the .25 caliber.
Is .25 is kind of the workhorse for the bigger end of small game.
You could say that, yeah. A .25 caliber pellet just carries significantly more mass and energy downrange.
Yeah.
It makes it much more effective, especially at slightly longer, moderate ranges.
What's interesting here, though, is that ensuring a quick, clean kill no matter what you're using, rifle, bow, air gun, it still boils down to the same two fundamental things, right? Accuracy and distance.
Exactly. That never changes. But with air guns, you could argue accuracy is even more critical
Why is that?
because you just don't have the massive kinetic energy reserves or the shockwave effect you get with traditional firearms. This means skilled airgun hunters tend to prioritize very specific shot placement. Often the brain or the central nervous system is the preferred target.
Ah, okay. Headshots primarily.
Often, yes. Rather than relying solely on a traditional heart-lung shot, which might be perfectly fine with a higher power round that causes more internal damage, it really puts a premium on the hunter's skill and discipline.
So, okay. We've established that modern air rifles, these PCPs, that they do have the power. They can be humane if used correctly within their limits, with that precision you mentioned. So that shifts the conversation towards the practical side of things, like safety. You hear arguments that lower power makes them inherently safer, but the rule must be clear, right? Treat it like any firearm.
100%. An air gun, especially these high-power ones, must always, always be treated with the same respect and safety rules as any other firearm, period.
No complacency just because it uses air.
Absolutely not. While it's true, the physics mean a missed shot won't travel for miles like a centerfire bullet could. That pellet is still moving fast. A pellet leaving the barrel at, say, 900 feet per second, that's absolutely lethal at close range, and it can travel surprisingly far with enough residual energy to cause injury or damage.
Okay, wait. Let's pause on that. If I'm maybe doing some pest control, say, near a property line, maybe there's a house 100 yards away behind my backstop. If I take a shot at a squirrel at, say, 30 yards and I miss, how far can that pellet realistically travel and still be dangerous? Is it actually safe in those kinds of semi-suburban environments?
That's a really important question, and the research is pretty clear. Depending on the caliber, the angle of the shot, and the specific pellet, it could potentially travel several hundred yards. Sometimes sources cite over 400 yards, though obviously its energy drops off very quickly.
400 yards? Wow.
Yeah. So the key safety factor, just like with any firearm, remains. Know your target and what is beyond it. Understand the trajectory and the maximum range of your specific rifle and pellet combination. The margin for error might be smaller than with a .306 sure, but the potential for danger absolutely remains. It's not a toy.
That's a critical point for anyone listening.
Yeah.
Okay, so safety protocols are identical. Now, let's get to the payoff. Why go through these considerations? Why bother with the power limitations compared to traditional firearms? This is where those practical advantages you mentioned come in, the things that make airgun hunting appealing.
Right, and this is where it really shines, particularly for things like training or for use in areas where noise or proximity is a concern. First off, the lack of recoil, or, well, very minimal recoil compared to powder burners. That's a huge benefit.
How so?
Well, think about new hunters or even experienced shooters trying to hone their precision, eliminating that flinch reflex that harsh recoil can cause. It leads to much faster skill development and, frankly, better long-term accuracy habits.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Training without anticipating a big kick would be fantastic for fundamentals. What about the sound? You mentioned that. That's often a massive limiting factor for hunters, especially near, the urban edge.
The sound reduction is probably the single biggest selling point for many people. The report, the noise, it's significantly quieter. It often sounds more like maybe a loud clap or a nail gun going off rather than a distinct gunshot.
Okay.
And this makes air gun hunting uniquely suited for those localized pest control situations we talked about.
Yeah.
Where noise ordinances or just being considerate of neighbors might completely rule out using traditional firearms, it offers discretion.
Discretion. It's a good word for it. And beyond just sound and recoil, any other practical pluses?
Oh, absolutely. Ammunition, for one. Pellets are significantly cheaper than rimfire or centerfire
Right.
cartridges.
Practice gets much more affordable.
Way more affordable. You can shoot a lot, really practice those fundamentals without, breaking the bank. And another thing, kind of related to safety, but also comfort, hearing protection. While you should always wear eye protection, those pellets are still projectiles moving fast.
Sure, iPro always.
The fact that ear protection is often optional or at least less critical because the sound level is so much lower, that's an awesome bonus. It just makes the whole experience potentially more pleasant, maybe less pressured.
Less gear, more connection to the environment,
Could
maybe.
be, yeah.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. To summarize this whole deep dive for you listening, modern airgun hunting, driven by that PCP technology, is definitely legitimate. These rifles can provide the necessary power, the FPE, for humane kills on small game. We're talking squirrels, rabbits, yes,
Mm-hmm.
but also potentially woodchucks, raccoons, specific pests like iguanas, provided you respect the power limits, choose the right caliber, and prioritize that precise shot placement.
Mm-hmm. Accuracy is paramount.
And the big advantages: minimal recoil, which is great for training and just comfortable shooting. Significantly less noise, opening up possibilities for hunting or pest control closer to sensitive areas. And lower ammo cost. Makes it a really interesting alternative.
And if we connect all that back to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
those undeniable benefits of reduced sound and the much shorter maximum travel distance of a stray pellet compared to a bullet, that makes these tools extremely attractive for managing wildlife in, let's say, increasingly populated landscapes.
Which actually raises a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider after this. If pest control laws and definitions do vary so much from place to place, how might this airgun advantage, the ability to potentially manage local animal populations more safely, more quietly, with high precision, how might that influence future regulations? Could we see definitions change about where and how we manage pests, especially as environments get more crowded? Does it challenge how we think about the rules?
It definitely suggests we might see these tools become, maybe not mandated, but certainly more explicitly permitted or even encouraged in certain sensitive areas, precisely because of those safety and sound profiles. It's definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Well, that's been our deep dive into the world of modern airgun hunting. Thanks for tuning in.